For 18 years, my family made me believe I was the outsider, the mistake, the girl who didn't belong at her own table. At my father's will reading, my sister demanded a DNA test to prove I deserved anything. I expected humiliation. What I didn't expect was the lawyer opening the results, going silent, then looking directly at her with a question that turned my sister's face white. In one moment, the truth shattered everything, and justice finally began. When people hear my story now, they always ask the same question: how did you not see it sooner? The truth is, when you grow up being treated like you don't belong, you start to believe the problem is you, not the people around you. My earliest memories are of that dining table in the Harper house. My stepmother Vivian across from me, swirling red wine in her glass, as if the whole world existed only to entertain her. She'd study my face like I was some strange object she'd found on the street and decided to let inside for the night. "It's strange, isn't it?" she'd say, loud enough for my father to hear but soft enough to pretend it wasn't meant to hurt. "She looks nothing like you, William. Not your eyes, not your nose. Nothing at all." My father would clear his throat, shift uncomfortably, maybe reach for the salt or take a sip of water, but he never actually defended me. Alyssa, my little half-sister, would giggle because kids mirror whatever gets attention. Over time, she learned that laughing at me, questioning me, treating me like some questionable guest instead of family, made Vivian smile. When you're a child, you inhale those moments like secondhand smoke. You don't even realize you're choking. At school, I was just Candace. I got good grades, joined the debate team, became the girl teachers trusted to keep group projects from collapsing. But every afternoon when I walked through that oversized front door, the air changed. I became the reminder of my father's first marriage, of the wife who died too young, of a life Vivian could never control. I would catch her sometimes, standing in the hallway, staring at the only picture of my mother my father had insisted on keeping. Vivian's jaw would tighten, her eyes hardening as if this woman she'd never met was personally mocking her from inside the frame. When I was 15, I wrote my father 5 letters from summer camp. 5. In each one, I begged him in carefully chosen words to really see me. I told him I was scared to come home because Vivian never spoke to me unless it was to criticize something. I told him how Alyssa had started repeating her lines. "You're probably not even his real daughter, you know. Mom says you're lucky he lets you live here at all." I slipped those letters into the mailbox with shaking hands and waited all summer for a response that never came. Not a postcard, not an email, nothing. I told myself he was busy, that important men didn't have time for teenage drama, that maybe he had read them and just didn't know what to say. What I really believed, though, was simpler and much more painful. He didn't care enough to answer. That belief became the foundation of everything that came after. By 17, I had learned to survive by disappearing. I stayed late at the library, volunteered for extra shifts at my part-time job, did anything to avoid being home. Then one night, by complete accident, I walked past his study and saw the door slightly open. I pushed it gently, intending to ask if he could sign a permission slip. Instead, I found him sitting at his desk, shoulders shaking, holding a photograph of my mother. I froze. I had never seen my father cry. This man, who lived in a carefully controlled world of business suits and scheduled meetings, was breaking down alone in a room lined with diplomas and leather-bound books. For a second, I thought this was my chance. I imagined walking in, telling him how much I missed her too, how lost I felt, how badly I wanted to feel like I still had a parent. But when he noticed me, his face transformed in an instant. The softness vanished. His expression hardened into something closed and unreadable. "What do you need?" he asked, like I was a stranger interrupting a confidential meeting. I muttered an apology, left the unsigned form on the corner of his desk, and walked out. The conversation we never had that night echoed in my head for years. At 17, I packed a single suitcase, stuffed it with more fear than clothes, and left that house. Nobody tried to stop me. No one followed me to the door. My father didn't call. Vivian didn't care. Alyssa laughed and said, "Good luck, imposter," as if I were just some extra character being written out of their family story. I genuinely believed that by walking out, I was freeing them from an inconvenience. For 18 years, I built a life alone. I changed my last name to Moore, my mother's maiden name, and started over in Chicago. I worked 3 jobs while putting myself through school, slept in a studio so small the kitchen sink was practically on top of the bed, and learned to pretend I liked being detached from anyone who might hurt me. On paper, by 36, I had become a success. CFO of a consulting firm, corner office, people who called me ma'am in meetings. Colleagues would say things like, "You must come from a very strong family to be this driven." And I would just smile and let them believe whatever story made sense to them. The real story sat like a locked box inside my chest. Then one afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with the kind of cold, polite finality only a lawyer can manage. "Dear Miss Moore," it began, "we regret to inform you that William Harper passed away on." 3 neat paragraphs, no emotion, just logistics. It listed the time of death, the hospital, and the date of the will reading. There was no phone call, no personal message from any relative, no, "We thought you should know," just a calendar appointment attached to a stranger's condolences. I stared at that email for a long time, waiting to feel something clear and simple. Relief, anger, grief. What I felt instead was a tangled knot of all 3, wrapped tightly around 18 years of silence. I almost didn't go. The petty part of me thought, why should I show up now? He never showed up for me. But another part, the part that still secretly craved answers like oxygen, whispered that this might be my last chance to understand what the hell had happened in that house. So I booked a rental car, took a few days off work, and drove back to the place I had spent most of my life trying to forget. As I turned onto the long driveway, the house emerged from behind the trees, just as I remembered it. Expensive, imposing, and emotionally empty. It looked like something out of a magazine. All clean lines and manicured lawns. But I knew every corner where pain had been buried instead of discussed. When I stepped out of the car and looked up at the 2nd floor, I saw her, Vivian, still immaculate at almost 70, stood framed in the upstairs window, staring down at me. Most widows I've met in my work, the ones who truly loved their husbands, wear their grief like a second skin. Vivian's expression wasn't grief, it was something closer to panic. Her fingers gripped the curtain fabric so tightly I could see her knuckles from the driveway. That split second told me more than any greeting ever could. She hadn't expected me to come, or maybe she'd counted on me being too ashamed to show my face. And if you've ever walked into a room where you know people have spent years discussing you behind your back, you know that feeling that hits right under your ribs. As I stepped into the foyer, conversations dipped and shifted. Relatives I barely recognized turned their heads, eyes flicking over my clothes, my hair, my posture, assessing and judging in the same breath. Their whispers weren't even subtle, so she did come. Only for the money, obviously. You'd think she'd at least call him before he died. None of them knew the truth, that every time I considered calling, I heard Vivian's voice in my head telling me I didn't belong, and my father's silence echoing behind it. If you've ever been made to feel like an intruder in your own story, type, "I hear you" in the comments, because that was me in that foyer, surrounded by people who knew my name but not my life. Vivian floated down the stairs with Alyssa at her side, the 2 of them moving like a matched set. My sister had grown into a polished, confident woman in a tailored black dress and diamond earrings that probably cost more than my first car. She walked like someone who had spent her entire life being told she was the center of the universe. I wondered what that felt like. "Candace," Vivian said, the word tasting wrong in her mouth. "You look different. Life tends to do that," I replied. Alyssa gave me the kind of smile you give a stranger you're forced to be polite to at a work event. "Glad you could make it," she said. But her tone added, "Unfortunately." After an hour of awkward condolences and small talk that felt like interrogation, Martin Chen, my father's attorney, called everyone to the sitting room for the will reading. The air shifted. People who had been avoiding eye contact suddenly sat up straighter, expressions tightening with anticipation. It never ceases to amaze me how quickly grief can turn into accounting when money enters the conversation. Before Martin could even open the folder in front of him, Alyssa stood up. She had always liked the spotlight. "Some things never change." "Before we start," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "I think we should address something important, just so everyone feels this is fair." That word hung in the air like a hook. Fair. My skin prickled. Vivian turned toward her daughter with a look of maternal pride. This was planned. Whatever was coming, they'd discussed it already. "Candace," Alyssa continued, turning to face me, "you've been gone a long time. You left when you were what, 17? We all know there were questions even before that." Laughter rustled through the room like static. "Since Dad's will mentions biological children," she went on, "I think it's only reasonable that you take a DNA test to confirm you're actually his daughter before you receive anything from his estate." She delivered the line like she was offering me a glass of water instead of cutting my identity open in front of a room full of people. For a heartbeat, my mind went blank. It wasn't the demand that stunned me. I'd been hearing versions of it my whole life. "You don't look like him. Are you sure you're really his?" What shocked me was the lack of objection from anyone else. No one stood up. No one said, "That's cruel, Alyssa." Instead, heads nodded. A murmur of agreement rolled through the room as if she'd voiced an uncomfortable truth everyone secretly believed. My eyes drifted to Vivian. She was watching me intently, her expression composed. But under it, I caught something sharp and hungry. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Public humiliation. The final proof that I was never really one of them. If you were in my position right there, what would you do? Would you walk out, slam the door and never look back? Or would you stay and let them test your very blood just to prove a point? Pause for a second and tell me in the comments. Would you stay or leave? Because what I did next didn't just change my life, it exposed the biggest lie in that entire room. And it wasn't about me. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I didn't give Vivian or Alyssa the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of humiliation cross my face. Instead, I sat there calmly, as if I'd been waiting my entire life for this moment, which, in a way, I had. "I'll take the test," I said, my voice steady enough to cut the room in half. Alyssa's triumphant smile was almost instantaneous, a reflex born from years of being told she was right about everything. But before she could savor it, I added the sentence that froze the entire room. "But since the will mentions biological children, it's only fair that everyone claiming inheritance takes the same test." Silence. Then a ripple of shock passed through the room like a breeze catching fire. A few relatives looked confused, others leaned forward, as if waiting for a grenade to detonate. And Vivian's carefully constructed smile faltered. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. I saw it, a flicker of fear, a microsecond of panic, a crack in her armor. Alyssa scoffed with forced confidence. "Fine. I have nothing to hide," she said loudly. Her voice carried the bravado of someone who'd never been told no in her life. But her eyes darted to her mother's face, searching for reassurance. And in that tiny, fragile moment, something inside me shifted. Until now, part of me had believed Vivian simply disliked me, resented me for existing, maybe hated my mother. But this reaction wasn't irritation or jealousy. This was fear. as if the test wasn't a trap for me, but a threat to her. Martin Chen cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain control of the room. DNA testing will only take a few days, he said. We can temporarily adjourn. No, Vivian interrupted sharply, then caught herself and softened her tone. I mean, surely we can proceed with the will reading while the test is being processed. Martin raised an eyebrow. The will stipulates biological heirs. Without test results, nothing can be distributed. Vivian's jaw tightened. She hated not being in control. She hated rules she didn't write. Very well, she said coldly. Let's get this over with. And with that, the room emptied, as if some invisible vacuum had sucked all the warmth out of it, as people shuffled out, whispering behind their hands. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Eleanor, stood slowly from the back row. I hadn't seen her in 18 years. Vivian had pushed her out of my life long before I understood what was happening. But now she was here, older, smaller, but her eyes were the same. Those eyes saw everything. She gave me a single, sharp nod, like a general giving permission to fire, like she'd been waiting decades for someone to finally challenge Vivian. And for the first time since I drove up that driveway, I felt a spark of something warm. I wasn't completely alone. The DNA samples were collected the next morning. Swabs, signatures, chain of custody forms, lawyers hovering. Vivian watched the technician like a hawk, suspicious of everyone, certain someone was out to destroy her. Funny how guilty people always assume that. Alyssa tried to make small talk in the hallway afterward, as if we were suddenly two sisters sharing a mildly awkward moment, instead of preparing for the emotional equivalent of a nuclear test. You know, she said, her smile overly practiced. When this is all over, maybe we can try to rebuild things. Maybe even be friends. I looked her straight in the eyes. You don't get to rewrite history because you're nervous. She blinked, stunned. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not even our father. Especially not our father. She walked away quickly, her heels clicking too fast against the floor. But it was later that day, far from the lawyers, far from my sister's attempts at manipulation, that everything began to shift. It happened at the funeral. A gray Tuesday morning with a sky that looked as tired as I felt. The church was filled with people wearing black outfits and fake mourning faces. People who had avoided my father for years, but now acted devastated for the sake of appearances. I stood alone in the back row, placed behind cousins I hadn't seen since childhood. An intentional arrangement orchestrated by Vivian, who couldn't bear the thought of me being visible. The program, printed on expensive cream cardstock, listed family members in bold script. Under a section labeled Other Relatives, in tiny print, was my name. Not daughter, not kin, just other. The message was clear. I was still the outsider. The mistake. The girl who didn't belong. Vivian ascended the podium for the eulogy. Draped in designer black that probably cost more than my old apartment's rent, she spoke about her beloved husband, about their devoted daughter, Alyssa, about their beautiful life together. She painted a portrait of a perfect family, the kind of portrait where I didn't exist. She skipped over the first 3 years of my father's parenthood as if they had never happened, as if my mother had never lived, as if I had never been born. Not once did my name pass her lips. Not once was I acknowledged, sitting there in the back, surrounded by people who didn't want me there. Something inside me hardened. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It wasn't grief. Not today. It was clarity, the kind that hits like ice water. These people had never been my family. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. And they never would be. After the service, I was heading toward my car when someone slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. Rosa, the housekeeper who'd worked for my father for over 15 years. She had always been kind to me when I was a child, the only person in that house who ever looked at me without suspicion or contempt. She didn't say a word. She just squeezed my hand and kept walking. I unfolded the note once I reached the parking lot. The handwriting was uneven but unmistakably hers. Mr. Harper's study. 3rd floor. He wanted you to see it. I have the key. A chill crawled down my spine. The 3rd floor had been locked my entire childhood. Vivian told everyone it was because my father worked on confidential business documents there. I had believed her. Everyone had believed her. But if that room was harmless, why had she tried so hard to keep it sealed? That evening, while the rest of the house buzzed with post-funeral whispers and catered appetizers, I cornered Rosa in the kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly as she dried them. "Your father kept that room locked," she said quietly. Miss Vivian tried to find the key many times. She never could. "Why?" I asked. Rosa let out a slow, shaky breath. "Because after his stroke, your father realized things. Things Vivian didn't want anyone to know." Her eyes glistened. "He was trapped, Candace. She controlled everything who he spoke to, what he saw, what mail reached him. He couldn't protect you the way he wanted to, but he tried." She reached into her apron and handed me a small brass key. "Mr. Chen brought this to me this morning. He said, 'Give it to Candace. She'll know what to do.'" My heart pounded. What had he left in that room? What had Vivian been so desperate to hide? I waited until the house was quiet. Until Vivian and Alyssa retreated to their wing like royalty, insulated from the peasants. Until the distant cousins left drunk on wine and self-importance. Then I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. My footsteps felt too loud, my breath too sharp. I found the door at the end of the dim hallway, the door I had walked past 1,000 times as a child, wondering what existed behind it. I inserted the key. It clicked with a sound that felt like the past unlocking itself. I pushed the door open and stepped into a room that stole the air from my lungs. Photos, hundreds of them, covering every wall. Not family portraits, not holidays, not memories of Alyssa or Vivian. They were photos of me, not from childhood, from adulthood. Surveillance shots, me at work, me entering my apartment building, me walking to the train, me speaking at conferences, me laughing at a restaurant with colleagues. My entire adult life, tracked and documented. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had been watching over me. Quietly, secretly, because someone else had made sure he wasn't allowed to do it openly. On the desk, I found a folder, thick, heavy. My hands shook as I opened it. The first document was a DNA test, dated 12 years ago. I read the results once, then again, then a third time, because my brain refused to process it the first two. Alyssa Harper. 0% biological relationship to William Harper. My knees nearly gave out. My sister, the girl who'd mocked me my entire life for not belonging, wasn't his child. She had never been his child. Vivian had lied to him, lied to Alyssa, lied to everyone. And he had known for 12 years. Below that test were medical records. The story unfolded in painful clarity. When Alyssa needed a bone marrow transplant, my father volunteered to be tested. He wasn't a match. Doctors revealed the truth. He ordered the DNA test. He confronted Vivian. And everything fell apart. I kept reading, and every page pulled the ground further out from beneath me. A divorce decree finalized 5 years ago. Hidden. Financial documents showing he'd been supporting me through Martin for years. Letters, my letters, the ones I had written from summer camp, the ones I believed he had ignored. Vivian had intercepted them. He never knew I'd reached out. He kept them all. Every unopened envelope. And on the center of the desk, there was a single handwritten letter addressed to me. My father's writing. Shaky. Weak. The date in the corner was 2 months before his death. I held my breath. I opened it, and as I began to read, one truth became clearer than anything I had ever known. Everything I believed about myself, and everything they wanted me to believe, was a lie, and Vivian Harper was about to face justice she never imagined. And I promise you, what happened next changed everything. I stood there in that sealed room, surrounded by 16 years worth of silent truth, feeling like every wall had suddenly leaned in on me. My father, this man I had spent nearly 2 decades hating, resenting, grieving, missing, had been watching over me all along. Not with calls, not with visits, not with the open love I craved, but with quiet, desperate attempts to stay connected from a cage he never escaped. It hurt, it comforted, it confused me, it broke me, it rebuilt me. I don't know how long I stood there gripping that letter. Minutes, hours, enough time for the air to settle with the weight of everything I had learned. And then footsteps, soft at first, careful, hesitant. My body tensed instinctively. No one else was supposed to know about this room. Rosa would never send anyone. Martin wouldn't come here. That left only 2 possibilities, Vivian or Alyssa. The footsteps paused right outside the door, as if the person behind it was gathering strength. Then, the knob turned slowly. When the door swung open, Alyssa stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes immediately latching onto the papers spread across the desk, then on the photographs covering the walls, then on the letter in my hands. Her face went pale, so pale. It looked like all the blood in her body had rushed out through her shoes. "What?" she whispered, barely audible. "What is all of this?" I didn't speak. I didn't move. I simply held her gaze. And that was enough, because in that single, silent moment, my sister, the girl who had mocked me, belittled me, treated me like a stain on her perfect world, realized she was standing at the edge of a cliff she had never seen coming. She stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning faster now, panic rising like flames climbing dry curtains. "Why are there pictures of you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would Dad? Why would he?" She saw the DNA test then. She didn't pick it up. She didn't have to. The bold, clinical words stared at her from the top of the page like a verdict. 0% biological relationship to William Harper. Her knees wobbled. She grabbed the edge of the desk. "No," she whispered. "No, this is wrong. This has to be wrong." Still, I said nothing, because I wanted her to understand. I wanted her to hear the truth not from my mouth, but from her own unraveling. Her breathing turned shallow. Her hand shook as she reached for the test, but she pulled back as if afraid it might burn her. "Where did this come from?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "Who put this here? Did you do this? Did you make this?" "Alyssa," I finally said, quietly. "This isn't about me." She blinked rapidly. "Then who is it about?" I gestured toward the documents. "Read the dates." She scanned the first page, then the second, then the medical records beneath them, and then something inside her broke visibly, painfully, undeniably. 12 years ago?" she whispered. "He knew? He knew then? All this time?" She looked up at me, her eyes glossy, confused, and terrified. "Why didn't he tell me? Why wouldn't he say anything?" I opened my mouth to answer, but for once in her life, Alyssa didn't want my voice. She wanted the one she'd spent a lifetime worshiping. She snatched the letter addressed to me off the desk. "Is that from Dad?" "Yes." "What does it say?" A small, cruel part of me wanted to say, "Ask your mother," but the truth was bigger than petty satisfaction. So I simply said, "Read it." She held the paper like it might explode, her eyes scanning each shaky line of my father's handwriting. With every sentence she read, her face crumbled more. He tried," she whispered. "He tried to come back to you. He tried to divorce her. He tried to reach out." Her voice broke completely. "He wrote to you. He thought she. She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "All those letters," she whispered. "He kept them? He kept your letters?" Vivian hid them from him. Alyssa stumbled backward until her back hit the wall. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Candace, I didn't know." I believed her, and that was somehow worse. She wasn't lying. She was clueless, because Vivian had wanted her that way. Upon believing she was a queen, Alyssa rubbed her face harshly, leaving streaks of mascara on her palms. "Why would she do this?" she demanded. "Why would she hide your letters? Why would she lie to me, to him?" "Because Vivian needed a weapon," I said softly. "And you were the easiest one to use." She sank to the floor slowly, like a marionette with its strings cut. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't see her as my enemy. I didn't see her as the girl who'd made my life hell. I saw a child who had grown up drowning in a pool of lies she thought was water. She hugged her knees. "If Dad knew, why didn't he act? He had a stroke," I said. "And after that, Vivian controlled everything." Alyssa looked up sharply. "He divorced her." She hid it. Her mouth fell open. "He divorced her? My parents weren't married? Not for the last 5 years." She covered her face with her hands, letting out a sound that wasn't quite a sob but wasn't anything else either. "My whole life is a lie." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because at that moment, she wasn't wrong. She was drowning in the ocean her mother created. After several minutes, she stood slowly, shakily. Her eyes were red, her voice was thin. "What are you going to do with this?" she whispered. I met her stare evenly. "Tell the truth." She swallowed hard. "And Mom?" "Mom," I repeated bitterly, "will deal with the consequences of what she's done." "She'll be ruined," Alyssa whispered. "She'll lose everything." "She took everything from us," I said, my voice low but firm. "This is justice." Alyssa looked away. She wasn't ready to face that word. Not yet. She took one more shaky breath, turned, and walked out of the room without another word. When the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. I gathered the documents carefully, sliding them into a folder, the weight of them pressing heavily against my palms. Every page was a weapon. Every signature was evidence. Every sentence was a truth buried under years of manipulation. And tomorrow morning, the will reading would turn into something far bigger than a legal formality. It would become a reckoning. For me, for Alyssa, for my father, and for Vivian Harper, who had spent 30 years building a world made of lies, never expecting the truth to come knocking. But it was coming, and it was coming with me. The next morning, Vivian greeted me at breakfast with her usual false warmth. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was hours away from collapsing. Alyssa didn't meet my eyes. She didn't speak to her mother either. The tension between them was thick like the air before a thunderstorm. As I left the table, Vivian called after me. "Wear something appropriate for the will reading, dear. Today will determine the course of our family's future." She said it smugly, confident, certain, and I smiled to myself because she was right. Today would determine everything, just not the way she imagined. When we arrived at Martin Chen's office, the air shifted again, charged, expectant, electric. Relatives filled the room, eager to witness the distribution of wealth, but what they witnessed instead was the collapse of a dynasty built on lies, and the rebirth of the daughter they had spent 18 years trying to erase. What happened in that room changed everything for all of us. Type justice in the comments if you're ready for what happens next. The morning of the will reading felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke up before the alarm. Long before sunlight touched the curtains, my mind replaying every page I had found in my father's third-floor study. The photographs, the DNA test, the medical files, the letters, my letters hidden for decades, and the final message he wrote with hands that could barely hold a pen. I had the truth. All of it, And today, their world would hear it too. When I stepped out of my room, the house felt colder, not physically, emotionally, like the walls themselves were tense. I found Alyssa in the hallway, dressed in a black blazer and pencil skirt, the picture of controlled perfection, except her eyes ruined the illusion. They were puffy, rimmed red. She had cried, and hard. When she noticed me, she straightened her shoulders as if armor could materialize from posture alone. "Morning," she said, her voice stiff. I nodded. No hostility, no warmth, just truth. Vivian joined us moments later, floating down the grand staircase, like a woman auditioning for the role of grieving widow. Her jewelry sparkled. Her hair was flawless. Her smile was soft, too soft, like butter left out on the counter. She scanned our faces, searching for cracks. She found none. "Girls," she said, slipping effortlessly into maternal authority. "Let's stay composed today. The will reading is a formality. Nothing more." Alyssa stiffened. I said nothing. I watched her, studied her, because today she would learn exactly how it feels when the lies you built a kingdom on finally turn to ash. Breakfast was quiet. Forks scraping plates, coffee being poured, the hollow click of a spoon against ceramic. No conversation, no eye contact, only tension vibrating under the tablecloth. When we finally stepped outside and slid into the waiting car, I caught Vivian studying me through the reflection in the window. She wasn't looking at me like a stepdaughter. She wasn't looking at me like an inconvenience. She was assessing me like a threat, one she couldn't name yet but felt in her bones. For once, the fear wasn't mine. It was hers. The drive to the attorney's office took 40 minutes, 40 minutes of silence, broken only by the occasional buzz of a text message on Vivian's phone. Probably friends offering sympathy, or people pretending to care because they smelled potential money in the air. When we pulled up to the towering glass building downtown, Vivian exhaled dramatically. "Remember," she said, directing it to me but pretending to include us all. "Your father wanted fairness. His wishes must be respected." "They will be," I said softly, "exactly as he intended." That earned me a sharp glare, but she let it go. She thought she was safe. Denial is a powerful drug. Inside the conference room, relatives had already gathered, settling into their seats like vultures circling a carcass they hoped would still twitch. Conversations hushed when I entered. Eyes followed me, curious, judgmental, calculating. The outsider, the long-lost daughter, the alleged imposter. If only they knew how wrong they'd been. Martin Chen sat at the head of the table, a thick binder in front of him, his expression unreadable. He rose when we entered. "Good morning, everyone. Please find your seats. We have a great deal to cover." I chose a chair near the center of the table. Alyssa sat to my right, stiff as a statue. Vivian took the seat on the opposite end, crossing her legs with elegance designed for an audience. She believed today would confirm her narrative. Candace, the non-daughter. Candace, the intruder. Candace with no legal claim and no place among them. Today, she would finally prove it. She had no idea what was coming. Martin cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the reading of William Harper's will, we must address one of the clauses he added 2 years ago." Every head turned. Some leaned forward, some visibly perked up at the possibility of drama. "This clause," Martin continued, "states that all heirs must be verified as biological children of Mr. Harper in order to receive inheritance." A few people murmured in agreement. They assumed this rule was aimed at me. That was the beauty of it. "DNA tests were conducted this week," Martin said, lifting a sealed envelope from the folder. "Results have now returned." Vivian clasped her hands triumphantly. Alyssa lifted her chin with that old superiority she wore like perfume. I simply folded my hands in my lap. Calm, steady, waiting. "First result," Martin began. "Candace Harper, 99.99% biological match to William Harper." The room inhaled sharply. Vivian blinked rapidly. Alyssa's lips parted, confusion flickering through her perfect posture. I sat still, quiet, unmoved. My father was mine, and I was his. No lie could erase that anymore. Second result, Martin said, turning the page. Alyssa Harper. A tremor ran through the room. Zero biological relationship to William Harper? Gasps. Hands covering mouths, chairs scraping. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Someone else whispered, "I knew it." Alyssa froze, completely, her face drained of color, her breath catching in her throat as if her lungs forgot how to work. She stared at Martin, then at her mother, then back at the page. "That's not possible," she said, her voice rising sharply. "Run the test again." The lab made a mistake. Vivian was equally stunned. For the first time in years, she didn't have a script ready. She shook her head slowly, as if outraged at the very suggestion. "This is absurd. There must be an error in the sample handling." There's no error," Martin interrupted coolly. A second test was run to confirm. Both match. Alyssa covered her mouth with trembling fingers, her eyes filling with panic and betrayal. Mom! Mom! Say something! Tell them this isn't true." The room fell dead silent. Every eye turned to Vivian. She was cornered, pinned by the truth she'd spent decades burying. "Alyssa," Martin said gently, "your father discovered this years ago during your bone marrow testing. A medical necessity uncovered the truth." Alyssa's legs buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table for balance. He knew?" "Yes," Martin said, "for 12 years. "Why didn't he say anything?" she whispered, looking shattered. "Why didn't he tell me?" I spoke then, my voice steady. "He was trying to protect you, Alyssa. Unlike her." I nodded toward Vivian. The room collectively inhaled, and finally, the cracks splintering across Alyssa's face grew into a shattering she couldn't contain. She turned toward her mother, not with anger at first, but with disbelief. "Mom?" Vivian placed a hand on her chest, playing the role she knew best. The misunderstood mother. "Sweetheart, I didn't tell you because I love you. I wanted to protect you. You're my daughter." "But you lied to me," Alyssa whispered. "My entire life, you let me believe I was his daughter." "I raised you," Vivian insisted. "That counts for more than biology." "And you used that lie," I said sharply, "to turn her against me, to turn Dad against me, to keep me out of this family." Vivian spun toward me, her mask slipping. "You were never part of this family." "No," I said quietly. "According to the DNA, you never were." A ripple of murmurs rolled through the room. Martin raised a hand. "We're not done," he said. "Mr. Harper left additional instructions." Vivian stiffened. She didn't know about this part. She hadn't anticipated it. Martin lifted another folder. "William Harper discovered the truth 12 years ago. The deception, the manipulation, the fraud that shaped this family. He attempted to divorce Vivian Harper, and the divorce was finalized 5 years ago." The room gasped again. Alyssa turned to her mother. "You and Dad divorced?" "It meant nothing," Vivian snapped. "We agreed to keep things the same for the family's sake." "For Alyssa's sake," Martin countered. He stayed silent, but he ensured she would be provided for as an adult, not as an heir. Alyssa broke into sobs then. Loud, gutting sobs that echoed off the mahogany walls. Vivian grabbed her shoulders. "Don't cry. Don't let them see you cry. You are a Harper." "No," Alyssa choked out, pulling away violently. "I'm not." The words hit the table like a crack of thunder. Her face twisted not with anger at me, but with a raw, aching betrayal directed at the woman standing beside her. I watched her melt down with a complicated mixture of pain and recognition. Because I had lived that feeling my entire childhood, she was finally tasting the poison she once helped feed me. The difference was, I didn't savor it. I didn't enjoy seeing her crumble. I only wondered how someone could recover from discovering their whole identity was built on another person's lie. Martin cleared his throat again. At this point, per the will and per law, the entire Harper estate passes to the sole biological heir, Candace Harper. The room exploded in reactions: shock, rage, envy, disbelief. I was watching Vivian. Her face twisted in a way I had never seen, not grief, not fear, not sadness, something darker, something like hatred forged by humiliation. She opened her mouth, ready to launch into whatever manipulative speech she'd prepared for every emergency. But before she could speak, Martin held up a hand. "One more thing," he said. "Mr. Harper left a letter specifically to be read in this room. Today, with all parties present." That silenced everyone. He unfolded the letter. My father's handwriting, the same shaky, determined lines I had read in his study, filled the page. "To my daughters," Martin began reading, "and to those who shaped their lives." And the truth he spoke next unraveled the last threads holding this family together. If you're ready for what comes next, type "justice for Candace" in the comments. Martin unfolded the letter, and the room fell into a silence so sharp it felt like the air itself was waiting to hear what William Harper had kept hidden for over a decade. Even the people who came only to sniff out money leaned forward. Vivian stiffened but didn't blink. Alyssa wiped her face with a trembling hand and braced herself. I held the edge of my chair to stop my hands from shaking, because this letter was the moment my father finally spoke for himself after years of forced silence. Martin began reading, his voice steady but weighted with emotion. "To my daughters, Candace and Alyssa, and to those who played roles in the shaping good or bad of their lives. If you are hearing this, it means I can no longer speak to you myself, so this letter must do what I failed to do in life: tell the truth." A few people shifted in their seats. Vivian's jaw tightened. "First," Martin continued, "I want it understood that Candace is my biological daughter. I have seen her grow into a woman of remarkable integrity and strength. She is everything her mother hoped she would become." My throat locked. I didn't expect that line to hit so hard. "I know," the letter went on, "that the lies surrounding her childhood caused her great pain, lies that I allowed to continue because I was weak, afraid, and grieving. For that, Candace, I owe you my deepest apology. None of it was your fault." Someone in the room sniffled quietly. "It wasn't me. It wasn't Alyssa. It came from somewhere in the back. Maybe an aunt who had participated in the whispers but didn't expect to be exposed like this." "Second," Martin read, pausing before the next lines, "I discovered 12 years ago that Alyssa is not my biological child. The deception began before she was born. The truth was hidden from me by her mother, Vivian Shaw." Gasps erupted across the table. A cousin put a hand over her mouth. Another whispered, "My God." But no one was as still as Vivian. She didn't flinch. She didn't twitch. She just stared at the letter like she had rehearsed this moment for years and still wasn't ready. "Alyssa," the letter said next, "I want you to know that biology does not determine love. Despite everything, I cared for you deeply. But love cannot thrive in a home poisoned by lies. Your mother's choices twisted our family into something it was never meant to be." Alyssa broke again. Tears streamed down her face, but this time she didn't hide them. She wasn't fighting the truth anymore. She was drowning in it. "And Vivian," Martin continued, reading my father's words with a tone that felt deliberate and final, "you turned my home into a battlefield. You isolated me from those who loved me. You hid letters from my daughter. You ensured that every moment of peace was replaced with suspicion and control. You stole years from me. Years I could have spent healing, rebuilding, and being the father Candace deserved." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. People shifted uncomfortably. Even those who once adored Vivian couldn't deny their shock. I stayed silent. The letter said, because I believed Alyssa did not deserve to suffer for your actions. And after my stroke, I lacked the physical strength to fight you. But do not mistake silence for forgiveness. This final act is the truth I never got to speak aloud. Vivian's lips parted. She looked as if she wanted to yell, to stand, to accuse. But the room was no longer hers. For the first time in years, Vivian Harper was not the most powerful person in the building. She was simply exposed. To my daughter Candace, the letter continued. My greatest shame is that I let you grow up believing you were unloved. I watched from a distance as you built a life without me. I wanted to return to you so many times, but fear kept me prisoner. Fear that you would reject me as I once rejected you. If I could undo one thing in my life, it would be the way I failed you. I felt that line in my bones. Failure, fear, distance, silence. Everything I had lived through was there in his handwriting. Every ache, every question, every wound. I hope, the letter went on, that in time you can understand the depth of my regret. You deserved a father who fought for you. I was not that man, but I pray this final truth gives you the freedom to stop carrying the weight of a lie that was never yours. I couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. For the first time since childhood, I felt my father reaching toward me, not through absence, not through shadows, but in a room full of witnesses who finally knew what he had never been allowed to say. Finally, the letter said, my estate belongs to my biological daughter. She alone carries my name, my blood, and the legacy I was unable to give her in life. Vivian's breath stuttered. Alyssa closed her eyes in surrender. This is not punishment. Martin read. It is restoration. Candace, I hope this gives you the foundation you were denied as a child. And Alyssa, though you are not of my blood, you were once of my heart. I hope you use this truth to build a life grounded in honesty, not illusion. A stillness swept through the room like the world itself paused to listen. Then came the final lines, shaky, uneven, but unmistakably his. To both my daughters, your worth was never meant to be measured against each other. You were harmed by a lie neither of you created. I pray you both break free from the shadow of our past. This truth is yours now. Do with it what I could not. Move forward. Martin placed the letter down gently, as if the paper itself were fragile. No one spoke. No one moved. The room was frozen under the weight of a lifetime of secrets collapsing. Finally, Alyssa whispered, he loved her more than me. Her voice cracked, jagged as broken glass. He wrote more to her. He apologized to her. Her eyes locked onto me with a grief I had never seen before. Not jealousy, not cruelty, just loss. He loved her because she was his, Vivian snapped, finally letting the venom spill. He never fully loved you, because you weren't. Enough, Martin cut in sharply. You will not speak to her that way in this room. Vivian swung her glare toward him, but her power was gone. Every lie she'd built her life on was now spread across the table like shattered glass. Alyssa wiped her cheeks, looked at her mother with shattered clarity, and said in a trembling voice, you did this. You did all of this. The accusation was soft, but it hit harder than any scream could have. Vivian stepped back as if struck. I protected you, she insisted. I gave you everything. You gave me lies, Alyssa whispered. You built my whole life on a lie. She looked at me again, and for the first time in our entire lives, there was no hatred in her eyes, no competition, no superiority, just the dawning realization that she had never been my rival, only another victim of Vivian's desperation. And then, suddenly, the room shifted. People were no longer looking at me like the outsider. They were looking at me like the rightful daughter, the wronged daughter, the one who survived. It was the first time in my life that being a Harper didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like truth. Vivian tried one last time to regain control. Candace, she said, softening her voice into the same sugary tone she used to manipulate my father. You're a good person. You don't want to tear this family apart. You can choose to fix this. You can... No, I said quietly. The single word was enough to silence her, enough to reclaim every piece of myself she had tried to bury. Dad already fixed it, I added. You just don't like the result. A low hum of shock rippled through the room. Someone near the door whispered, "She deserves every penny." Another murmured, "Vivian didn't see this coming." Engagement moment. If you were sitting in this room right now, who would you side with, Candace or Alyssa? Comment, Candace deserved better, if you'd be on my side. Alyssa slumped into her chair, her grief swallowing every trace of the sister who used to smirk at my pain. And Vivian finally looked small, not powerful, not elegant, not in control, just small and frightened and very, very alone. Martin closed the folder. We will now proceed with the formal reading of the estate. And just like that, the truth had finished detonating, but the aftershock had only begun. The moment Martin announced that we were moving into the formal reading of the estate, the room changed again. It was subtle at first, like a shift in gravity. People sat up straighter, eyes darting between me, Alyssa, and Vivian, because now the truth was no longer just emotional. It was financial, tangible, final, and in this family, money had always been the real language. Martin cleared his throat and began listing assets, accounts, properties, investments, and trusts, with a calm professionalism that only highlighted how completely the ground was giving way beneath Vivian's feet. My father had accumulated far more than I ever realized. Decades of work, strategic investments, properties scattered across Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, even as far as California. But every line Martin read ended with the exact same conclusion. This asset is transferred in full to Candace Harper. Some relatives nodded politely, as if approving of a fairness they had once denied me. Others looked away, ashamed. Vivian. Though Vivian didn't breathe. I swear she didn't. It was like her body refused to accept oxygen until someone corrected what was happening. And no one did. The Harper family home, Martin continued, located at... Wait. Vivian's voice sliced the air like a blade. You can't possibly mean that the house is hers. Martin didn't even look up. Mrs. Harper. Or rather, Miss Shaw. Don't you dare, she spat. You don't address me by that name. Martin calmly flipped a page. Your divorce from Mr. Harper was finalized on March 3rd, 5 years ago. Legally, you have not been Mrs. Harper for half a decade. A few people gasped. Someone whispered, "So the rumors were true." Vivian's fingers curled into the arms of her chair. That house, she said through clenched teeth, is mine. I lived in it for 32 years. I ran that home. You raised a daughter who wasn't his. Martin cut in, still maddeningly calm. And your prenuptial agreement states that all real estate acquired by Mr. Harper prior to the marriage remains his sole property in the event of divorce. Vivian's face twisted. He bought that house 3 months after we married. Yes, Martin replied, with funds from his premarital trust. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She had no counter. Not one. I watched her fight for air as she realized the life she had curated so precisely was slipping through her fingers like sand. Moving on, Martin said, turning another page. The Harper Consulting Trust. He didn't even like her. Vivian snapped suddenly, pointing at me. She ran away at 17 and never came back. She didn't call. She didn't visit. She didn't care about him. The irony of that statement punched me in the chest. She said it proudly, as if it condemned me. But all it really did was expose her, so I answered her. Not with anger, Not with spite, just truth. I stopped coming back because every time I did, you made sure I felt unwelcome in my own home. Silence fell again. Thick, cold, heavy. Vivian glared at me with the same seething intensity she had aimed at me my entire childhood. But for the first time, her glare didn't pierce. It bounced off. He pitied you, she hissed. That's why he left you everything. He always pitied you because you were such a disappointment. Alyssa jerked upright. Mom, stop. No, Vivian snapped. You don't get to tell me to stop. You have no place to judge me after what you've done to this family. Alyssa stared at her, stunned. What I did? Yes, Vivian said, as if this were the most obvious truth in the world. If you hadn't gotten sick 12 years ago, if the doctors hadn't done that test, none of this would be happening. The entire room recoiled. Alyssa's face went white. Are you saying this is my fault? Vivian exhaled sharply, already realizing her mistake, but unable to step back from it. I'm saying everything fell apart after that. If the test hadn't been done, we wouldn't be here now. Alyssa stared at her mother like she was a stranger, like she was finally seeing the shape beneath the mask. So your lies are my fault? She whispered. Your betrayal is my fault? Vivian moved toward her, reaching out instinctively, but Alyssa took a step back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was tiny, barely a shift of weight, but it was the first time I had ever seen Alyssa choose distance from her mother. It was the first time she understood that Vivian was not a shield. She was the wound. Martin cleared his throat again, keeping the reading moving, even as the family dynamic disintegrated in real time. The financial accounts listed here transfer to Candace Harper. The lake house in Wisconsin transfers to Candace Harper. The coastal property in California transfers to... Enough! Vivian screamed. The word echoed off the walls, startling even the people who'd been expecting another outburst. You cannot do this. You cannot take my entire life and give it to that girl. You cannot erase me. Martin folded his hands on the desk. Mrs. Shaw, the only person responsible for your erasure is you. William put these protections in place specifically to prevent you from doing exactly what you are trying to do right now. She turned to Alyssa, desperate now. Say something. Tell them this is wrong. Alyssa wiped her face, her eyes still swollen from crying. But there was something new there. Clarity. Strength. Mom, she said quietly, this isn't wrong, it's just the truth. Vivian staggered back as if she'd been struck. You're choosing her? I'm choosing reality, Alyssa said. I'm choosing not to keep living in your lies. The room held its breath. This was the moment Vivian realized she had lost not just wealth, not just status, not just a house she thought she'd die in, but the person she had manipulated the most. Control was her oxygen, and now she was suffocating. She turned her fury back to me. You're doing this. You're tearing this family apart because you're vindictive and jealous. And, Vivian, I said softly, you tore this family apart long before I ever had the chance. Her mouth twitched. A muscle in her jaw spasmed. And then, for the first time in my entire life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Because she knew the performance was over. She knew the audience had shifted sides, and she knew she was no longer the narrator of this family's story. I was. Martin finished the estate reading with the final lines. Per Mr. Harper's instructions, all assets not otherwise distributed pass wholly and exclusively to his biological daughter, Candace Harper. This concludes the legal reading of the will. The room didn't applaud. They didn't congratulate me. They simply absorbed the truth, absorbed the consequences, absorbed the fall of a matriarch who once believed herself untouchable. As people began to rise, whispering to one another, Vivian remained seated, gripping the arms of her chair like a person strapped in during a plane crash. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was trying to breathe. "Candace," she said finally, her voice small but still sharp around the edges. I paused at the door. "I took care of him," she said. "All those years. I took care of him." "No," I replied gently. "You controlled him." She swallowed. "Please, don't throw me out of the house. Dad divorced you 5 years ago," I said. "I'm not throwing you out. You were never supposed to be there." The truth landed so cleanly, so precisely, that she couldn't respond. I left her sitting there, trembling, broken, not because I wished her suffering, but because she finally had to sit in the consequences of her own actions. In the hallway, a few relatives tried to approach me with soft apologies, gentle smiles, sudden affection that had never been offered before. "You know," one aunt said, "we always had a feeling something wasn't right. If you ever need anything, sweetheart." Another chimed in. "Family is family." I walked past them without stopping. Family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by truth, and none of them stood for the truth when it mattered. Alyssa caught up to me outside the building. She looked exhausted, like she had lost 10 years in a single morning. But there was something honest in her eyes that had never been there before. "I'm leaving," she said. "I can't go home with her." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to help me," she added quickly. "I just didn't want to disappear without telling you." I nodded. For once, there was no anger between us, just two women standing in the ruins of a childhood neither of us fully understood. "Alyssa," I said quietly, "what you do next, it's entirely yours. You finally get to choose." She swallowed hard. "I don't know who I am without her lies." "Then start with who you don't want to be," I said. "Sometimes that's enough." For a moment, she looked like she might hug me, but instead, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, nodded once, and walked away. Not victorious, not defeated, just beginning. If you've ever had to rebuild your identity from the ground up, comment "starting over" below. Vivian didn't leave quietly. I knew she wouldn't. Women like her never imagine a world where they don't win. They don't imagine doors closing in their faces. They don't imagine themselves packing their own suitcases. They imagine control until the day they die. But the house that once obeyed her now felt like it belonged to someone else. Her voice didn't carry the same weight. Her footsteps didn't echo with authority. Even the staff, those who used to stiffen at her presence, moved around her with the detached politeness reserved for someone whose power has expired. The day she came to collect her things, the sky hung low with thick gray clouds that made the entire property feel colder, emptier, stripped of illusions. I stood at the bottom of the staircase as she descended, each step showing a woman carved down to bone and resentment. She paused on the last step, her fingers tightening on the railing, as if the house itself were refusing to let her go. "This is ridiculous," she said, forcing a laugh that cracked at the edges. "I've lived here longer than you've been alive. I built this home. You built control," I said quietly. "Dad built the home." Her eyes flashed. "You think you know everything now, don't you? Because he left you a letter?" I met her gaze without flinching. "I know enough." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Candace, listen to me. This house doesn't have to be a battleground. I can stay in the guest wing. You'll barely notice me. I can help run things. I know how this family works. I know how the estate functions. You need someone like me." That was the most honest sentence she had spoken in 30 years. Not "you need me," but "you need someone like me." A manipulator, a gatekeeper, a puppeteer, someone who thrives in shadows where truth cannot reach. "No," I said simply. Vivian blinked. Once, twice, like she genuinely didn't understand the word. "What?" "You need to leave." "Candace," she snapped. "I took care of your father. I handled everything. I kept this family together. You kept him isolated, I replied. You kept me away from him. You kept Alyssa trapped in your lies. You kept the truth buried until it rotted. I protected my daughter. You protected your secret, I corrected. There's a difference. Her nostrils flared. Do you have any idea what people will think of me? Yes, I said. For once, the truth. She swallowed hard. Her hand trembled on the railing. I have nowhere to go. That line would have shattered me years ago. But now, it felt like exactly what she deserved. You'll figure something out, I told her. You always do when it benefits you. For the first time in my life, Vivian Harper had no script, no performance, no audience, just consequences. She turned toward the hallway, dismissing me with a flick of her hand. But even her posture looked different, smaller, heavier, like the lies she carried finally weighed her down. Upstairs, I heard drawers opening, closing, suitcases zipping, hangers scraping across metal rods. Every sound felt like the house exhaling after decades of being suffocated by her presence. Rosa appeared beside me quietly. She will be gone soon, she said softly. The house will feel different. Better? I asked. Rosa hesitated, then nodded, quieter. Honest. It struck me how rare honesty had been in this place, how every corner held secrets, spoken or unspoken, and how those secrets shaped me into someone who had learned early that silence was safer than truth. A door slammed upstairs. Another bag hit the floor. Vivian called out sharply for someone to help her carry boxes. No one answered. When she finally came back down, 2 oversized suitcases trailed behind her, the wheels scraping the polished wood she once insisted we not scratch. She stopped in front of me again, her eyes scanning my face for softness, weakness, hesitation, anything she could pry open and crawl through. You think you've won, she whispered, but you don't know how people will talk about you. They'll see you as a vulture, a girl who didn't visit for 18 years and walked away with everything. Let them talk, I replied. The truth speaks louder. Her lips curled. You're just like your mother. That line used to hurt. Now it felt like a blessing. Thank you, I said. And Vivian froze. She wasn't expecting gratitude. She wasn't expecting me to embrace the comparison. She wasn't expecting anything except the shame she'd relied on to silence me. When she realized her final weapon held no power, something inside her broke, not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, like a glass hairline crack finally giving way after years of pressure. She stepped back, gripping her luggage so tightly her knuckles whitened. Alyssa will come back to me, she murmured, as if reassuring herself. She always does. She needs me. She always has. I didn't respond. Some truths have to reveal themselves naturally. Some illusions collapse only when the person clinging to them grows too tired to hold them up. She dragged her suitcases to the front door, pausing one last time to look around the house like a queen forced to surrender her throne. This should have been mine, she whispered. It never was, I said. She stepped outside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. And just like that, Vivian was gone. Not screamed out, not pushed out, not publicly disgraced. Just removed from the story she polluted. The silence she left behind wasn't peaceful. Not yet. It was the silence after a storm, when everything is damp and heavy, and the air is filled with the scent of broken things. I walked through the house slowly, room to room, hallway to hallway. Every step revealed memories I didn't know. I still carried me at 8, standing by the portraits, wondering why I didn't look like anyone else. Me at 15 writing letters no one ever gave to my father. Me at 17 dragging a suitcase out the front door alone. And somewhere, faintly, the ghost of who I might have been if someone had simply told the truth sooner. I found myself in my father's study, the room that had opened every wound and stitched them all at the same time. I placed my hand on the desk where I found his letter. The wood was cool under my palm. Solid, steady, unlike the man who had written those words, who had lived his life torn between regret and fear. "I'm here," I whispered. "I found you. Even if it was too late, I found you." And standing there, I realized something I hadn't before. My father wasn't the only one who kept a part of himself locked away. I did too. I kept the version of me that still hoped, still wanted family sealed behind anger and distance. But now, the truth was out. The lies were gone. The villain was gone. The narrative was mine. Not the one they gave me, the one I chose. As I stepped out of the study, Rosa met me in the hallway and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "The house feels lighter," she said. "So do you. Maybe it's the first time it's ever felt like mine." She nodded. "Your father would be proud." My breath caught, not because she said it, but because I finally believed it could be true. Comment: the truth always wins. If you felt that moment when Vivian walked out, the town never really forgot the Harper name, but it learned to rewrite it. Before the truth came out, people whispered about the perfect Harper family, wealthy, polished, respectable. After the will reading, after Vivian's downfall, after every carefully built lie collapsed, right in the center of Martin Chen's office, the whispers changed. Some were sympathetic, some were cruel, some were fascinated in the way people are drawn to train wrecks they secretly hope to see. But all of them recognized one thing: I was the last Harper standing. Not because I fought for the name, not because I tried to reclaim some legacy, but because I simply survived the story they set for me. And now that survival was supposed to evolve into something else: leadership, responsibility, a future that wasn't shaped by shame or silence. Yet even as I tried to build that future, the past wasn't done with me. One afternoon, 6 months after Vivian left and 3 months after Alyssa moved to Oregon, I received an unexpected call. A journalist, not a tabloid writer, not a gossip blogger, an investigative reporter from a reputable magazine. "Miss Harper," she said, her voice cool and practiced, "we're running a feature on inheritance fraud and long-term familial deception within high-net-worth families. We'd like to interview you." I froze, because this moment was exactly what Vivian had feared. The story going public, her actions exposed nationally, her reputation turning to dust. And part of me, a small part buried deep in my chest, felt a spark of something dark. Justice. Not vengeance, not cruelty, justice. But I also knew what stories like this did. They turned human beings into symbols. They stripped nuance. They painted villains and heroes without caring if either label fit cleanly. And I didn't want my father dragged through the mud. He had failed me. Yes, but he had tried to repair the damage in the only way he knew how. He deserved better than to become a headline about marital betrayal and decades-old secrets. "No," I said finally. "I'm not interested." The journalist pushed. "This story touches a lot of people. You could help others in similar situations. Or I could destroy someone who's already destroyed herself." I replied, "That's not the kind of justice I'm after." She paused, then said quietly, "Most people would want revenge. Revenge is for people still living in their past," I told her. "I'm not." I hung up, but the call lingered in my mind long after. It reminded me how fragile endings are, that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a door quietly closing behind a woman dragging 2 suitcases. Sometimes it's a truth written in a shaking hand on a late-night letter. Sometimes it's the absence of apology. And sometimes it's the choice not to destroy someone who already has nothing left. Later that week, Martin invited me to the office to finalize the foundation documents. His space was orderly, almost surgical in its neatness. Files labeled, books aligned, A plant that somehow stayed alive despite no visible sunlight. Your father would be proud, he said as he slid the papers across the desk. This foundation, it's the opposite of the world you grew up in. Maybe that's the point, I said. Something different should rise out of the ruins. As I signed the last form, Martin hesitated. There's something else, he said. A letter arrived for you. He handed me a thin envelope made of cheap paper. The return address was unfamiliar. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but something about it, something hesitant and careful, told me exactly who it was. Alyssa. I stared at the envelope but didn't open it. Not yet. Not there. Take your time, Martin said gently. This isn't a letter you rush. I slipped it into my bag. An hour later, I drove to the coast, parked by the cliff overlooking the ocean, and finally opened it. Her handwriting was small, almost timid, as though she was afraid to take up space on the page. Candace, I don't know how to start this without sounding like someone I'm not, maybe because I still don't know who I am. I got a job at a nonprofit here, nothing fancy, nothing impressive. But for the first time in my life, I'm earning something that isn't tied to a lie. Some days I want to disappear. Some days I want to scream. Some days I feel like everything inside me is unraveling. But other days, rare ones, I feel like maybe I'm becoming someone I could be proud of. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying, not because you asked me to, not because anyone asked me to, but because facing the truth, the real truth, is the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I don't know if we'll ever be sisters in the real sense. I don't know if I deserve that, but I want you to know I'm not hiding anymore. Not behind my mother, not behind the Harper name, not behind the lies. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Grace. She signed it Grace. Not Alyssa, not Harper. Grace, her middle name. A name untouched by deception, a name she chose for herself, and that alone made my throat tighten. I folded the letter and pressed it against my heartbeat. I wasn't ready to respond, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a beginning, or the possibility of one. Days passed, then weeks. I settled into life in the cottage mornings of ocean wind, evenings of peace I had never known growing up. But peace doesn't erase the past. It softens it, makes space for something new to grow on top of it. One cold autumn morning, Rosa called. Miss Candace, she said, there is something I thought you should know. Mrs. Vivian, her cousin, asked her to leave. I inhaled slowly. Where did she go? She moved into a small apartment outside the city. Very small. She doesn't speak to many people. A pause. She has no one left. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. I felt closure. This was the justice my father never had the strength to pursue. The justice I didn't need to force. The justice that came naturally when the truth finally saw daylight. But Rosa wasn't finished. She asked about you once, she said. She wanted to know if you were angry. I let out a breath. What did you tell her? The truth, Rosa said, that your anger isn't what ruined her life. That line stayed with me long after the call ended, because it was the truth. Vivian wasn't destroyed by me, or the will, or the DNA test. She was destroyed by the life she built, a life made of manipulation, control, lies stacked on lies, all balanced on the fragile belief that truth would never catch up. It always does. Eventually, every lie runs out of room. That weekend, I visited my father's grave for the first time since the funeral. Not because I felt obligated, but because the anger that once stood between us finally felt thinner, lighter, easier to breathe around. The cemetery was quiet, the air crisp with the first hints of winter. I knelt beside his headstone, tracing each letter of his name with my fingers. I wish you had fought sooner, I whispered. I wish you had found your voice before it was too late. The wind blew across the grass, carrying the scent of pine and salt water. "But I heard you," I said. "I found your truth. That's enough now." I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my hands, and for the first time in my life, I walked away from that gravesite without feeling abandoned, because the truth, the full truth, was no longer buried with him. It was living with me, growing with me, protecting me, guiding me forward. Comment truth heals if this part hit you. 6 months after the truth detonated and rearranged every piece of my life, something unexpected happened. Not dramatic, not explosive, not the kind of moment that shatters a world. It was quiet, gentle, almost ordinary, the kind of moment you don't realize is important until long after it settles into your bones. I woke up in the cottage to the sound of waves breaking softly against the shore, the morning light spilling across the floor in long gold ribbons, and for the first time in decades, I didn't wake up feeling like someone was waiting to judge me. No eyes watching, no whispers following, no fear that I would step into a room and discover I didn't belong there. The silence around me was clean, unburdened, mine. I walked to the porch with a cup of coffee warming my hands and watched the world move slowly into daylight. The sky wasn't dramatic, no blazing sunrise, no fiery pink clouds, just a soft, steady brightness stretching across the horizon. And as I watched it, something inside me shifted. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. I didn't notice the tears slipping down my cheeks until I tasted salt on my lips. Tears not from pain or grief or fear, but release. The kind you only feel after finally stepping out of a story that never belonged to you in the first place. Later that morning, as I organized grant applications for the foundation, I found myself rereading the words my father had written in his final letter. Words he never finished. Words that had become the anchor of everything I was rebuilding. "You were always my daughter. You never needed to prove you belonged. The only person you must convince now is yourself." I read those lines again and again, letting them settle into the parts of me I once believed were unlovable, and slowly, something else began to surface: gratitude, not for the pain, not for the years of silence, but for the clarity that finally came when the truth was forced into the open. Because truth, unlike lies, does not crumble. Truth transforms. It breaks what needs breaking. It reveals what needs revealing. It heals what was never supposed to stay wounded. In the afternoon, my grandmother visited the cottage. She walked in with the same quiet dignity she carried all her life, the kind that made you feel like she saw more than she ever said. She looked around the living room, taking in the photographs I had hung on the walls. "You've made this place beautiful," she said softly. "It feels honest." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. She touched the picture of my mother, the one of her laughing on the beach, hair whipping wildly in the wind. "Your mother would have loved this," she whispered. "She always wanted a home where her child could grow without fear." I swallowed hard. I wish she had been here. "She is," my grandmother said. Then she placed a small envelope on the table. "I brought something for you." Inside was a handwritten note addressed to my mother from my father, dated months before my birth. The ink faded, the edges fragile. In it, he wrote about hope, about becoming a father, about wanting to give me a life filled with safety and love. In that moment, the narrative I carried my whole life cracked open. My father did love me before the grief swallowed him, before Vivian twisted his world, before silence became easier than truth. He wasn't always the man who failed me. He had once been a man who dreamed of doing everything right. "People lose themselves," my grandmother said gently. "Your father was lost for a long time, but he found his way back to you in the only way he knew how." I pressed the note to my heart. I think I finally forgive him." "Good," she nodded. "Forgiving him doesn't excuse what happened. It frees you from carrying it." After she left, I walked down to the beach. The waves curled around my feet, cold and cleansing, and as the wind brushed against my skin, I realized I wasn't just closing a chapter. I was ending a generational wound, a legacy of silence, a lineage of secrets. I was becoming someone new, not shaped by lies, but shaped by truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart thudded in panic. But when I opened it, I froze. It was from Alyssa. A single line. I found out who my father is. I didn't know what to feel. Curiosity? Fear? Sympathy? Before I could decide, another message followed. It read, "I think I understand now why Mom lied. I don't excuse it. But I understand it. And I'm ready to tell you everything when you're ready to hear it." I stared at the message for a long time. The ocean roared beside me. I thought of the little girl Alyssa used to be, the child who laughed when Vivian mocked me, who grew up believing she was the chosen one. And I thought of the young woman she was now, broken, healing, trying. Maybe. I realized she and I weren't so different. We were both raised inside a lie. We both inherited wounds we didn't ask for. We both believed stories that were designed to keep us small. And maybe if we were lucky, we could both rewrite our endings. I typed back slowly, "I'm not ready yet, but I will be. Someday." She replied almost instantly, "Thank you." The phone felt warm in my hand as I tucked it away. Not every story ends neatly. Not every betrayal turns into a reunion. But sometimes, the first step toward healing is simply allowing the door to remain unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. As the sun dipped lower, painting the waves in deep gold, I thought of Vivian, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with distance. She had lived a life built on survival and manipulation, a life fueled by fear that the truth would one day expose her. And fear, when fed for decades, becomes a cage too small for anyone to escape. She wasn't defeated by me, or the will, or the DNA test. She was defeated by the life she crafted, a life that eventually closed in on itself. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. It unfolded slowly, inch by inch, truth by truth, until every lie had nowhere left to hide. My justice wasn't destroying her. My justice was freeing myself. Near sunset, I stood on the porch again and looked at the horizon spreading open before me, a future I never imagined I would have, a life I never believed I deserved, a peace I once thought was meant for other people. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and distant pine. I placed my father's unfinished letter on my lap and whispered into the last light of the day, "I forgive you, and I forgive myself." Because the truth is, forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you. It's about choosing to stop carrying the weight of what they did. And I was finally ready to set it down. As the sky darkened, I walked back inside my cottage, closing the door with a soft, steady finality. This was my home now, my story, my name, my freedom. And as I turned off the lights, a sense of certainty washed over me, quiet but powerful. I survived the family that tried to break me. I uncovered the secrets meant to bury me. I reclaimed the identity they tried to rewrite. And now, I get to live a life shaped not by pain, but by truth. If Candace's journey meant something to you, drop "Justice Served" in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, raw, human, and unforgettable, hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter.